Welcome back, friends. Brooke Peterson here, and we're going to be reading Chapter 9 of A History of Murder today. And before we get started, though, I'm going to treat you to another quick chapter of The Present Predicament. Like I told you in Chapter 28, it's holiday season 2021 as I'm recording this, and I thought it would be so fun to give you just a little taste of The Present Predicament. So last week we did Chapter 1, and this week we're going to do Chapter 2. It's a little longer, but it gets more into the story. So here we go. I brewed a pot of Grandma Lily's favorite sweet and spicy blend. As the tea steeped, the familiar scents of peppermint, cinnamon, and ginger filled the kitchen. I enjoyed taking care of her like she had taken care of me when I was a girl. Now in my 20s, we were more like girlfriends than grandmother and granddaughter. After a few sips from the dainty teacup painted with poinsettias, she began to look like herself again. "Thank you, dear," she smiled. "I hope we don't go through that again." "If we put some presents around the tree, maybe Elliot won't be able to reach the trunk to climb it," I said. Grandma liked the sound of my suggestion, both because it might tame her pesky feline and because she loved presents. "Who is on your list this year?" she asked me. I named off the usual suspects. Her and my parents, the same 3 people I always bought Christmas gifts for. "No one else?" she suggested, with a gleam in her eye. "Oh yeah, I almost forgot." Grandma's eyes widened. "Jed," I said, referring to the cute golden retriever we had recently taken in. Grandma Lily gave me one of her signature sly smiles. "If someone gives you a present, you may want to reciprocate." She added air quotes for effect. "You read too much into things, Grandma." "Something was said on Thanksgiving, that's all." The memory of Thanksgiving Day at Jericho House made me feel warm and cozy. Grandma and I set the dining table with the Royal Stafford pheasant design. Her lead crystal water goblets sparkled underneath the room's chandelier. The oak and maple leaves we brought in from the yard to sprinkle down the table's length made it look especially festive. Of course, the food was divine. Grandma was a fantastic cook. We had a traditional Thanksgiving feast: roast turkey, a mountain of mashed potatoes with homemade gravy and dressing, fresh rolls, and sweet treats. All traditional food, that is, except for one unique addition: a tray of corn dogs. Grandma Lily and the police chief Lance Garner came up with the little joke for my benefit. The corn dogs weren't from the Conoco station, though. Instead, Garner had them made by Eric at the Vintage Grill on Main Street. Who knew? Maybe corn dogs would become a new Martin family Thanksgiving staple. Want to know the whole story behind those corn dogs? Read the first book in the series, A History of Murder. Chief Garner wasn't the only Jericho Falls friend we had at our celebration. Bree Brandon, the local salon owner, and Karen Little, and Dr. Leonard Dunning from the Poison Pin Book Club also joined us. When we finished dinner and were sufficiently stuffed with dessert, Grandma Lily made a suggestion. "I wonder if you all would help Chloe and me start decorating Jericho House for Christmas." "Oh, Lily!" Bree clasped her hands together beneath her chin. "Could we please?" The other guests didn't seem quite as excited as sprightly Bree. They were more difficult to rouse from their relaxed positions throughout the parlor. "You know me," Grandma went on. "I love to decorate the mansion from stem to stern, but it's a lot of work. I'd appreciate everyone's help." Admiration for Grandma Lily got the group moving. In the end, we had a wonderful time. We played old Christmas vinyls on the record player and sang along. We drank cocoa and nibbled on only slightly stale candy canes we found in one of the boxes of decorations. Leonard and Bree wound silver garland around the banisters while Garner and I strung lights across the front porch. Before we knew it, the darkness had fallen and Jericho House looked like it belonged in the North Pole, not in the Nevada mountains. "Thank you so much, everyone," Grandma Lily beamed. Now Chloe and I will put up the trees." "Trees?" Bree asked, "as in more than one?" "Oh yes," explained Grandma Lily. "At Jericho House we always have 5 Christmas trees. One in the parlor, one in the library, a small one in the dining room to enjoy at Christmas dinner, one on the second-story landing, and—" Grandma frowned. Goodness, where does the fifth tree go? In the bathroom, joked Dr. Dunning. We all laughed, except Grandma. What's so funny? She said. I like a little Charlie Brown tree in there. It makes the room feel cheery. Oh, Grandma. I must have had a faraway look in my eye, because Grandma waved her hand in front of me. Earth to Chloe, did you hear me? I shook my head. Sorry, I was just reminiscing about Thanksgiving. By the way, I don't remember anyone mentioning buying presents for me. All I'm saying, Grandma instructed, is that you don't want to be caught empty-handed if Chief Garner gives you a gift. I shrugged and hoped I wasn't blushing at the thought of our handsome, kind friend. Jed and Elliot dashed into the room. Elliot's fur and tail were puffy, like he had been rubbed with a balloon, but I knew it was the fun these two were having causing him to fluff up. Jed panted cheerfully, his dark eyes twinkled, and his pink tongue fell out to one side. I reached down to ruffle his ears. What do you think, boy? Should I buy a gift for Garner? He stood and wagged his tail back and forth. Merely talking to Jed always got this reaction, but he was a clever dog who really liked Chief Garner, so perhaps he was giving me his canine blessing. All right, that was chapter number 2 of The Present Predicament. I hope you'll pick this up. It's available at all major retailers in ebook. It's available as a paper book like this from Amazon, or you can get the ebook for free by joining my website. Joining my newsletter. Visit my website to learn more, and I'll put the link below. All right, we're going to move on to chapter 29 of A History of Murder. When we left off last time, Chief Garner had come to Chloe's rescue after she got away from the guy who had attacked her, or grabbed her. She wasn't really attacked. He grabbed her, he pushed her down into the gravel, and she hurt her arm. And he also told her, he whispered in her ear, get away, nobody wants you here. And that's kind of playing through Chloe's head now that this is over. So we're going to go to chapter 29, Circle of Frustration. The next morning, Grandma asked me to leave my pickup behind for her. I'd like to go to town for a few more hanging geraniums, she said. It's so nice having a pickup around for these kinds of errands. I saw what she was doing, highlighting how convenient 2 vehicles could be. Yet another one of her subtle attempts to talk me into staying in Jericho Falls for good. I jumped into her Subaru, feeling a little more comfortable with Grandma's gigantic blingy keychain, and headed straight for the Opera House. I got a text from Mariah late the night before that she had made it home safely. She also said she would be at work by 8 o'clock if I still wanted to help her look through Art's stuff. Boy, did I. I parked at the front door and jumped out. With a jolt of nerves, I noticed Malcolm near the back of the building, leaning against the dumpster, smoking a cigarette. My heartbeat quickened. I reminded myself that I couldn't be sure that he was the one who attacked me. But even if he was, I certainly wasn't going to act afraid of him in broad daylight. He stood there as if he didn't have a care in the world. He looked up and caught me spying. Do you have a problem? He called out to me. I glared back. Good morning to you too, I said. He began walking in my direction. Did you sick the cops on me last night? My breath stuck in my chest, but I willed myself to stay steady. Why would I do that? That's what I'm asking. He was shouting now, still coming closer. Now leave me alone because I haven't done anything wrong. I didn't reply, only shrugged my shoulders. A sharp pain radiated down my right arm from this simple movement. Malcolm's claims of innocence did nothing to convince me that it wasn't him who was responsible for my injuries. Face it, he went on. If I was guilty of something, they'd have thrown me in jail. He tossed the butt of his cigarette into the gravel and ground it out with the scuffed toe of his dirty boot. And looky here, he sang, I'm a free man. He was such a creep. I couldn't stand his obnoxious, hateful attitude. What do you know about Art's death? I asked. He gave me a snide smile. Nothing. His indignation spurred me on. Did you know that Mariah was preparing to fire you before Art was killed? His false smile faded. Unlikely. He turned his back and began tucking in the tails of his wrinkled shirt. He disappeared into the same doorway I had watched him pass through the evening before. Even the way he slunk through without opening it all the way seemed familiar. I shivered. The front doors were open, so I went inside. Luke was folding the theater chairs and stacking them on a wheeled cart. He was wearing earphones and didn't hear me enter. Judge bounded over to greet me, though. I gave him a back scratch, and he panted his thanks. "Hi." Mariah poked her head out of the ticket booth, then hobbled into view. She had an antique wooden crutch under one arm. "Wow, is that from the Civil War?" I laughed. Mariah grinned. "Maybe." When the walking stick wasn't doing the trick, I asked Luke to dig this out of the prop closet. It's old, but still useful. Her comment made me think of Jericho House. Not just the dwelling itself, but all the furnishings and items within. For generations, they had been faithfully available whenever we needed something. It's raining, you say? There was undoubtedly an umbrella or two in the hall closet. You have a school program and need a costume? There were trunks in the attic full of old clothes. Need a tool? There was one of every variety in the basement. The place itself, and all it contained, had been in my family's possession for so long, sometimes I forgot their value. Sometimes I took it all for granted. "You okay?" Mariah caught the wistful look on my face. "Yeah, just feeling a little melancholy, I guess. Sort of like reverse homesickness. It's hard to explain." I changed the subject. "How's your knee today?" "Better, but I'm forcing myself to take it easy for a few days. I'm notorious for pushing it." I nodded in agreement. I could believe that about Mariah. "As it turns out," she continued, "the whole fiasco was for nothing." "What do you mean?" "Come see." She scooted herself back into the small space. I glanced at Luke. His headphones were now hanging around his neck. His music sounded small and screechy from where I stood, like an old dial-up computer trying to connect. He was watching his injured sister maneuver into the ticket booth. He seemed worried about her. When he caught me looking in his direction, he went back to folding chairs. "What's Luke doing?" I asked, turning to Mariah. "Clearing the floor for the Founders' Day ball. You coming?" "That again?" Not sure," I said. "It's going to be a lot of fun. You should try to make it. It's a formal this year in honor of the 150th anniversary. We have live music and great food." I didn't give an indication either way. "Anyway, take a look at this." Mariah swept her arm out, putting the room on display. "Look at what?" "No box. It was right there." She pointed to the small table where we had placed it the night before. Mariah eased herself into the only chair the tiny room could accommodate. "It's like it simply disappeared." "I don't think so," I said, glancing back in Luke's direction. Maybe he wasn't as concerned about his sister as he was the box of Art's belongings. "Someone moved it." Mariah scoffed. "No one would want that stuff." "What if it held clues to what happened to Art?" "You have to report this to the police." She sighed. "Do I have to? They've been snooping around here enough." "Yes, you have to," I told her. "Didn't they ask you to look for anything important?" Reluctantly, Mariah admitted that she would have to deal with the missing box soon enough and decided to call the police. She used the landline in the ticket office to make the call. While Mariah was occupied, I took the time to look around the room. Nothing else looked disturbed or rifled through. I kicked myself for not staying to go through the box last night. Only minutes passed before Chief Garner arrived. When he caught sight of me, here at the scene of another incident, his eyebrows rose. Then he frowned, but the expression turned into a suspicious grin. "We meet again, Miss Martin." I felt my cheeks redden. The chief turned his attention to Mariah. "Tell me what happened." Mariah relayed the story of how we left the box on the table last night after I had come to her aid, but when she returned to work that morning, it was nowhere to be found. "And what about you, Chloe? Why are you at the Opera House this morning?" I took a deep breath and stood up tall. I agreed to help Mariah sort through the items in the box to see if there was anything important inside. He glared at me. I knew he was thinking about my recent attack and his incessant warnings. Mariah looked back and forth at each of us, suddenly realizing we were in some kind of standoff. Listen, Chief, this was my idea. I have a lot on my plate this week, so I asked for Chloe's help. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. He pursed his lips. Let's move on. Did you lock up? Of course. This room must be kept locked. Tickets are as good as money, and there's always some of both in that little safe. Mariah gestured to a small black safe that looked as old as the crutch underneath her arm. Then we left through the side door. I locked that one too. The chief went to inspect the door jamb. Look here, he said. I leaned in, and I noticed 2 deep scrape marks on the wooden frame and one on the lock plate. They pried the door open and then used something to slide the cylinder. These old doors aren't very tricky to break into, I'm afraid. I suspect they managed something similar on the exterior door. But why would anyone want those things? Mariah echoed her comment from earlier. The chief was more diplomatic in his answer than I had been. Well, that depends on what the box contained, he said. Did you look through it? Mariah hung her head. No, after I screwed up my knee, the only thing I wanted to do was get home and rest. She leaned against the antique crutch and gave it a rueful look. I feel like such a klutz. Garner asked us both to step out of the room. We're unlikely to find anything, but I'm going to have the officers come in and check for fingerprints. He excused himself to make a phone call to the station. Mariah followed his instructions, but once he had stepped away, she began to complain. I don't think this is necessary. I mean, who cares if Art's stuff is gone? He's not going to need it. Mariah, I encouraged, aren't you concerned that someone broke in? Whether they stole anything or not, you're still the victim of a crime. I suppose, was all she said in reply. The theater was quiet now. Luke had removed all the chairs, and I didn't see him or his little white dog anywhere. I wondered if he was hiding from Chief Garner. After all, if he knew something about Art's missing stuff, he wouldn't want to risk being questioned. Garner returned and told us that his team would be there soon. In the meantime, he wanted us to stay out of the ticket booth and not disturb anything. I'm going backstage to check on a few things, Mariah said. I have a few volunteers working on Founders Day ball preparations. The chief gave his approval, noting that she shouldn't leave the premises until he and the other officers were finished looking around. Mariah consented, but still acted inconvenienced by all of this. After Mariah half-hopped, half-limped away, the police chief addressed me. He didn't look pleased. Chloe, we need to talk. Outside. Garner walked to the front of the building where I was parked. I followed a few steps behind him. He stopped, turned, and crossed his arms. How's your shoulder? Okay, I said, moving it around as if I needed to prove it. Is that a bruise on your wrist? He took my arm gingerly with one hand and pushed up the sleeve of my shirt with the other. He inspected my forearm and winced when he got a good look at the purplish red spot. I noticed the bruise that morning too, which was why I chose to wear a long-sleeve t-shirt even though it was going to be in the 80s. It looks worse than it feels, I told him, which was true. Listen, I saw Malcolm when I came here this morning. Yeah? Garner let go of my arm. He asked if I was the one to sick the cops on him, I said, making air quotes and a stupid face. This got a smile out of Garner. I found him after we left the concert. Yeah? I echoed. He was down at the Saddles and Spurs saloon at the time of your attack. I went over the bar's surveillance video. Malcolm entered through the saloon's back door at 7:06 p.m. and then left through the front at almost midnight. But Garner, that's impossible. When I left the park, it was 7 o'clock on the dot. It took us a few minutes to walk down Main, and then I saw him go into the Opera House. There's no way he could have gotten to the Saddles and Spurs saloon in a matter of minutes, especially through the back alleyway. It doesn't make sense. Garner shrugged. I saw the time-stamped video with my own eyes. He was there. Maybe you only thought he went inside the Opera House. I took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. And there's something else, Chief Garner said, with a note of irritation. You didn't mention anything to me about this box of art stuff last night. Uh-oh. I was shaken up, I guess. Right. He put his hands on his hips. I'm catching on to your methods, Chloe Martin. You wanted a chance to pursue it yourself before you told me, right? I didn't answer, keeping my gaze averted. But now, any evidence contained in that box that might have helped us find Art's killer is long gone. I sank down to sit on the wooden step of the opera house. I put my head in my hands. I had no idea this would happen. Garner paced a circle of frustration. You don't seem to believe me when I tell you that this case is deeper than you think. His voice rose in volume. Even a physical attack won't get you to leave this alone. Are you looking for trouble? His last statement was like a bucket of ice water hitting me. It was exactly what the cops kept accusing me of when Christy died. I couldn't tell them anything because I didn't know anything, but they were convinced I was withholding evidence. So they accused me of being a young girl just looking for trouble. Garner wanted me to think that he was different from the League of Good Old Boys from my past, but today he sounded just like them. I'm doing all I can to help my grandma, I seethed, which is a lot more than I can say for you. If you'd let me do my job instead of meddling. Meddling? I interrupted. I stood and marched towards him. I'm not meddling. This is my life, my home, my family you're talking about. It's not meddling when it's your own business. Garner spoke slowly and quietly. Our faces were only inches apart. I'm only saying that you're complicating things, and I want... He didn't get to tell me what he wanted. A squad car arrived, and Chief Garner backed away without finishing. Okay, we've got some tension between Chief Garner and Chloe. Thank you for joining me for Chapter 29. We're getting to the nitty-gritty of this story, and I can't wait to read Chapter 30 to you next time. We'll see you then.